Welcome to Monday's edition of COVID-19. The daily tally has dipped to the 400 level, but authorities remain on high alert as they point to the weekend factor and the persistent presence of cluster infections. We have more on this and on the country's vaccination campaign later on in the program. Here first is the broader pandemic coverage. Now, Soa, what is the latest here on the local front then?
Well, Sunny, as you said, the weekend factor is probably what has dragged down Monday's caseload to 485 infections as of 12 a.m. And that includes 454 domestic transmissions and 31 cases from abroad. So for the first time in 6 days, we are now back to the 400s. But the next graph is going to give us a clearer picture of the trend recently. It's nothing new that we have been seeing 400s on a Monday past the weekend due to a fewer number of tests conducted over the weekend. And the average in daily domestic transmissions is close to 600, so there's little reason for relief as of yet. Now, over 150 cases were reported in the capital Seoul and Gyeonggi-do province this Monday, and we've also got here 28 cases in Gyeongsangnam-do province, including a cluster infection linked to a foreign restaurant, and also here in Daegu, 26 cases where a cluster infection linked to a nightlife entertainment venue has now surpassed 300 in total. And the total number of cases here in the country now stands at 144,637. Let's also take a look at our vaccination updates. With close to 7.6 million people having received at least one jab of COVID-19 vaccine, that's almost 15% of the nation's population.
Right, and so this past Saturday, Korea marked 100 days since the start of its vaccination campaign, and starting this week, we can expect greater momentum, I hear.
Right, Sunny. We are expecting a higher number of daily inoculations beginning this week, along with a number of new groups subject to vaccination as well as reservation. And marking 100 days of COVID-19 vaccinations, Prime Minister Kim Boo-kyum over the weekend stressed the government's most imminent task on the vaccine front. Let's take a listen.
As people aged 60 and above are at high risk, it is the government's obligation to protect them first and foremost. Even if you haven't registered for vaccination yet, those aged 60 and above will be prioritized for surplus vaccines until June 19.
Beginning this Monday, vaccination for pre-registered seniors aged 60 to 64 has kicked off nationwide. They are receiving their first of 2 AstraZeneca doses. That's around 3.1 million, or 78.8% in that age group. Also, starting this Monday, Pfizer vaccines are being administered to soldiers under the age of 30, and applications for essential workers such as police officers and firefighters below 30 has started according to Schedule 2. However, kindergarten and daycare center instructors, as well as teachers of first and second graders at elementary schools, have to wait a little more following the government's recent revision of the vaccination timetable. They are expected to get their jabs along with other teachers in July. Now, going abroad, Israel, meanwhile, has started its vaccination program for teenagers aged 12 to 15 on Sunday, with some 600,000 eligible in that age group. And with around 55% of its population fully vaccinated, the country is expected to lift rules on the mask wearing indoors in mid-June. Now, let's move over to the UK now. Health Minister Matt Hancock says the Delta variant, which was first detected in India, is estimated to be 40% more transmissible than the Alpha variant, or also what's known before as the UK variant. But after receiving 2 doses of COVID-19 vaccine, protection is said to be equal. Now let's take a look at the figures abroad. And speaking of the UK, here at 4.4 million infections in total, over 5,200 cases were reported in the past day, and that is due to that Indian variant. Meanwhile, India, with 28.9 accumulated cases, is seeing over 100,000 daily infections, but that is a significant decline from the weeks before. And the total number of cases around the world stands at 174 million. Those are the updates I have for now. Back to you, Sunny.
All right, Soa, thank you for now. Meanwhile, Korean snacks are pleasing palates beyond borders amid the pandemic. And in this next report, we explore their growing fan base.
Wow! No way. No way. Wow.
A growing number of YouTubers have taken an interest in Korean snack foods, with hundreds of taste test videos posted online featuring Korea's most recognizable brands and tasty treats. Consumer spending has tumbled amid the COVID-19 pandemic, but people are still indulging their sweet tooth more than ever, with Korean confectionery firms enjoying large revenue windfalls.
This is legendary. A lot of people in Korea and all around the world.
Korea's iconic choco pie has been a hit with consumers worldwide. Korean instant noodles are also soaring in popularity, with exports topping the $600 million mark in 2020, a near 30% increase from a year earlier.
코로나19로 인해서 유통이나 소비 환경이 급격하게 온라인 환경, 비대면 환경으로 변화를 했는데 코로나 시대에 또 세계 사람들한테 관심이 높아진 건강식품, 발효식품, 또 간편식품 같은 것들을 우리 한류 열풍이랑 같이 연계를 해가지고 또 이렇게 잘 적극적으로 어필한 것들이 좋은 성과를 거둘 수 있는 배경이 되었다고 생각을 합니다.
Riding the global popularity of Korean food products, the country's agriculture exports hit a new high in 2020 to the tune of $7.5 billion. Korean-made frozen mandu products have also won over the hearts of American consumers. They have found a niche among health-conscious consumers in the US.
한국식의 어떤 피가 굉장히 얇고 속이 꽉 찬, 그리고 야채와 고기가 굉장히 조화롭게 어우러진 그런 건강한 맛으로 지금 많이 미국 소비자들을 좀 사로잡고 있고요. 사실 만두가 이제 우리나라도 그렇지만 다른 외국에서도 어떤 간식으로 좀 많이 소구가 되어 왔었었는데요. 이제 코로나19로 인해서 만두를 아예 주식화하는 경향이 좀 뚜렷해지면서 만두 소비도 실질적으로 많이 늘기도 했고, 이제 사람들 인식 속에서도 만두를 하나의 디시로서 좀 섭취하는 그런 양상을 보이고 있는 걸로 알고 있습니다.
One local food company raked in nearly $900 million last year from dumpling sales alone, with exports accounting for more than half of those revenues. The popularity of Korean food has extended to its more traditional staples as well. Fermented foods, especially kimchi, are a major part of this trend, helping kimchi exports reach an all-time high in 2020. So what can Korean food makers do to build upon this latest success and ensure that it can last for years to come?
식품 회사들이 이런 기관세 장벽, 농약 기준이나 유해물질 기준 이런 거를 정부하고 협업해서 국제 기준화시키는 이런 노력이 많이 필요하고, 자, 우리나라에서만 먹고 있는 채소류 같은 거 있죠. 원래 김치의 원료인 배추가 영문명이 차이니즈 캐비지였어요. 근데 식약처에서 이를 김치 캐비지로 변경한다든가, 국제적으로 먹을 수 있도록 식품 분류에 등재한다든가, 이런 노력을 많이 하고.
The COVID-19 pandemic has been an unexpected boon for Korean food makers, and now they will need to put a long-term strategy in place to carry them forward as consumer palates and preferences continue to change.
현재까지의 상황은 1,300만 명 접종과 25% 이상 접종 목표를 조기에 달성할 수 있을 걸로 예상하고 있습니다. 수도권 유행이 지속되고 있고, 대구 그리고 제주 지역에서도 변이 바이러스를 포함한 집단 감염이 계속되어 우려스러운 상황입니다.
Just this past weekend, Korea marked its first 100 days since the start of its COVID-19 inoculation drive. And the goal of offering the first dose to at least 25% of the population within the first half of the year is expected to be reached earlier than scheduled. For more on the vaccination efforts here and elsewhere around the world, I have Dr. Kim Seung-taek from Institute Pasteur Korea. Good to see you again, Dr. Kim.
Good afternoon.
And I also have Dr. David Kwak from Soonchang University Hospital. Welcome back, Dr. Kwak.
Thanks for having me.
Dr. Kim, Korea's daily tally hit above 700 this past weekend, on Saturday to be precise, before falling to the 400 level on this Monday. When are we poised to witness the impact of COVID-19 vaccinations on our daily caseloads?
Well, for that question, I think we have to look at the situations in the foreign countries, for example, like Israel and the US, because their vaccination rate is now just close to 60%, and they are starting to see some positive effect of the vaccination. They will see those kind of effect in Korea as well. But I think the first effect would be seen in probably in some nursing homes, and then for the elderly people, especially the people with high risk groups. And then we'll see just a decreasing number of confirmed cases, and even just some hospitalization and then death from that group, first of all. Then we'll see some advanced progress in terms of as the vaccination the rate increases.
Right. Dr. Kwak, the UK variant, which is now known as the Alpha variant, appears to be spreading on the local front, as seen in the video, over in the city of Daegu, as well as in the southern resort island of Jeju. What do you propose to tackle this reality?
Well, I think it should not be different from any other tactics that we have taken so far, in a sense that whether that be for Alpha variants or Delta variants, those are all poised to be blocked by any sort of vaccinations. Even though they may show different efficacy towards certain variants, it is currently known that the breakthrough rate for any variant is extremely low for people who's received vaccination. So I guess in keeping with the schedule of vaccinating the whole population, we should keep on doing it and maybe even speed up on it to catch a more portion of the population if we could. But number two, still, the variants is still variants, whether that be more transmissible than the original strains that we used to have. It only means that the game is now going to be in regards to the speed. It's going to be the speed of the variant spreading to people versus how big of a portion of the population we're going to be able to inoculate. So in that regards, I think the vaccination rate has to even be sped up a little more to hopefully inoculate as many people as possible in the soonest time possible. Also, as I was saying, the variant is not different from any other strains in a sense that it still spreads through human contact. So we still have to keep all the social distancing guidelines in order to be able to even block out the variants. But that is no different story than what we used to have from the original strains. So I just need to reiterate at this moment that social distancing guidelines, social distancing measures is really the ultimate method that we currently have to fight against the spread of the virus. And number two, also getting vaccinated in as many people as possible as their second best method.
Of course. Dr. Kim, Korea has granted the green light to 4 COVID-19 vaccines, AstraZeneca, Janssen, Moderna, and Pfizer, alphabetically speaking. Please remind us about who is eligible for which vaccine and why.
Well, according to some phase 3 clinical trials of those 4 vaccines, except for the Pfizer vaccines, all those vaccines are actually approved and it actually tested and then approved for the people with the age 18 or above. And for the Pfizer, it's age 16 or above. So, but now, now we have some more clinical data about even just including adolescents, the age is the 12 and above. But the original approval is based on such a thing. So, and then there was no actually differences in terms of some side effects and then some underlying disease, things like that, except for some age differences. But now, as some more real world the cases are actually accumulating, now we are seeing some very rare side effects, for example, like blood clots. So, considering that such kind of the side effects, now the authorities now just decide which group of people would be just shot with each vaccine. So, and then even for some AstraZeneca vaccine and the Janssen vaccines, the different country actually, they are actually opting up to some different just measures of different just guideline for which age groups should get those kind of the vaccines. But so major determinant at this point is just the blood clot issues. Other than that, I think all vaccines are just just equally, not equally, but just very effective against the COVID-19.
Right. Now, Dr. Kwok, as mentioned earlier, it's been roughly about 100 days since we started our inoculation drive, and we've offered the first dose to 7.5 million people. The goal is by the end of this month, we need to offer that same amount to 14 million people. How feasible is this plan, and what is your outlook on herd immunity?
Let me begin by stating my outlook on the herd immunity. We are going to have to reach it. So I am having my fingers crossed that we would before the estimated time of schedule. But in a sense that we have to reach 14 million people of inoculation before the end of the first half. We have about roughly 6 million people to catch up to within the next 3 weeks or so. That pretty much means that we would have to inoculate at least 400,000 people daily. And that's a very tough call because it's almost physically, I wouldn't say impossible, that's very hard to do. If we still slightly lower the plan of inoculation and go back to the original plan of inoculating 11 million people instead of 14 million people, it still means that we still have to inoculate about 200,000 people a day, and that's still very high. But in a sense that we're still speeding up, we're getting a lot of these vaccines into the country, and we have begun inoculating people more than older than 60 years of age, as well as those people who have signed up for Johnson & Johnson Janssen vaccines, and also those people, younger generations and older generations, including altogether, to sign up for no-show vaccines. We are showing a great height for registration for vaccinations, and it's a very great sign, even though we might not reach a complete 14 million people as planned. I'm still very thankful and hopeful that the compliance among the population to register for the vaccination is giving us a great hope, and hopefully within the estimated time, meaning before the November of time within this year, we'll be able to reach the herd immunity.
Dr. Kwok, speaking within your capacity as a medical professional yourself, do you believe that we have the necessary infrastructure to achieve the goal of 14 million within the first half of this year?
I would absolutely think so. If we start recruiting, let's say, not just the local clinics and hospitals, but because inoculation does not have to be only given by a doctor. It can also be given through nurses. And we have plenty of capacity in regards to human infrastructure to give out as many vaccines that we have on our soil as possible. I would say that we would be able to inoculate more than 400,000 jabs per day if we started to recruit a lot of these people. But it's only the matter of how many of these doses we currently have at hand. So I'll just hope that in the near future we'll get more doses that come into the country, so we could actually start also jabbing a lot more people daily as well.
Right. Elsewhere, authorities in Mexico are tackling thousands of daily infections, even as vaccination efforts are being ramped up there. For more on the situation there, I have Kylie Madry live on the line. Hello, Kylie.
Hi there, Sunny.
Kylie, let's begin with the COVID-19 situation in Mexico and the vaccination campaign there.
Of course. So if you remember from the last time we spoke, things were definitely off to a bit of a rocky start. But luckily, they are kind of finally speeding up. So far, Mexico has taken this sort of piecemeal approach, just getting vaccines wherever it can. So at the moment, we are using 5 different vaccines. 1 more is on the way. And so just by the end of last week, we've had 11% of Mexico's population completely vaccinated, more obviously with the first dose. And that includes healthcare workers, teachers, many of whom are also returning to in-person classes this week, and those over the age of 50. So now that we're having more and more vaccines coming in, we are looking to get those who haven't gotten their second shot yet, as well as the younger generations vaccinated as well.
Right, that is good to know. Kylie, Mexico's midterm elections took place this past Sunday amid the pandemic. Could you tell us a bit about this event as well?
Yes, of course. So that was just yesterday. And it's actually late here as well. It's early in the morning in Mexico, so we don't have the results in yet. I cannot give you any definitive answers as to what this means politically. However, millions of people did turn out yesterday in what have been called some of the largest and most historic elections in all of Mexico's history. So if we look at some of the issues that have plagued Mexico for years, we have violence, corruption, and poverty. All of those things have really just been exacerbated to the nth degree by COVID. These were some of Mexico's bloodiest elections ever. More than 80 candidates were killed. There have been some acts of violence during the campaigns. But luckily, yesterday, people lined up, they wore their masks, they used hand sanitizer, and things largely went off without a hitch.
Right. Kylie, I believe Mexico was also the recipient of Janssen vaccines from the US, just like Korea. What was behind this goodwill gesture, and what is the plan for the Janssen vaccines in Mexico?
So this actually comes after a meeting last week between the U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris with Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador. And they met to kind of discuss the use of the vaccine. The U.S. is donating 1 million of those in addition to the 2 million that Mexico had already promised to purchase. And these will all be destined for the U.S.-Mexico border. And this has largely been sort of an economic powerhouse for both countries. There's been a lot of trade back and forth. But since March of last year, when the pandemic struck, all non-essential travel through the border has been closed. So the hope is get as many people down there vaccinated and get movement flowing again.
Kylie, staying with the acts of kindness, I hear Mexico itself has also offered Argentina locally manufactured AstraZeneca vaccines. Could you tell us a bit about this also?
Of course. So it's a little bit complicated. These were originally Argentinian vaccines, so they started there. They were going to finish production in Mexico in what has been dubbed sort of AstraZeneca's Latin American hub. However, Mexico hasn't quite fulfilled its promises yet. Those vaccines ultimately finished production in the U.S. and then went back to Argentina. So these were never meant for Mexico in the first place. They were not taken away from any Mexicans. However, it does kind of show the bumps in the road along the way in Mexico and the bumps in the vaccine rollout so far.
Right, and talking about bumps, Kylie, what is the latest with regard to the fight against fake vaccines in Mexico?
As far as I can tell, these have really been isolated incidents. One local politician has said that up to 1,000 of his state's citizens have purchased these fake vaccines. But the only real evidence we've seen so far from the government was one lab selling fake Pfizer vaccines, and they claimed that only around 80 people were affected by this. And this was the news just came out a couple of weeks ago about them discovering the incident in February. So we also have to kind of keep in mind what was happening in February, what the situation was like then. There were almost no vaccines available for anybody in Mexico or in the US. Now what we are seeing are the people who have the money and who don't want to wait their turn in line are simply flying to the US where vaccines are freely available and they can just walk in and they fly right back.
I see. All right, Kylie, thank you very much for making the time to join us live at this hour.
Of course, thank you so much for having me.
All right, then back here in the studio, Dr. Kim, do you suppose the ease in COVID-19 situation in the US may be playing a part in the ease in COVID-19 situation in neighboring Mexico?
Well, I think so. And as Kylie just mentioned, some people are actually just flying just to US for some actually vaccine tourism. That actually, maybe the numbers is not really just quite high at this moment, but that would just ultimately just affects the situation in Mexico. And other than that, there are some other maybe factors, including there are many just people now just recovered after just a natural infection by this COVID-19 infection. And then there are other issues, for example, like the vaccination issues as well. And then the US was once the country with the highest number of confirmed cases with COVID-19 and also highest number of deaths. Now that those trends are now just substantially decrease. So those two countries are actually just facing to each other. And then the situation in the neighboring countries obviously affects the situation on the other part.
Right. Dr. Kwok, it appears the U.S. is now seeking to share its vaccines. It's given Janssen vaccines to Korea as well as to Mexico. How does this shift in stance by the U.S. look to affect global inoculation efforts?
Well, obviously donating to people, the countries that need the vaccinations would greatly help in a sense that it'll boost up the global inoculation rate. But not only in that sense, I think since the Western countries, including the US, of course Israel and other countries, are boosting up their rates and having almost reached about 60% of the population already being jabbed, they would require less of the currently manufactured vaccines. So those vaccines that were meant to either go to the Western countries or to have been allocated to the countries that need them would now better be inoculated, meaning it'll be distributed to these countries that need them more efficiently. Also, a huge factor, I think, is the US's companies expanding their manufacturing capacity by allowing other countries like ourselves, South Korea, to start manufacturing as well. That would obviously increase the capacity greatly and better help global inoculation rate in the sense that because we would also be able to enlarge the numbers of manufacture, that'll be allocated to the countries that were lacking in these vaccination doses before. So not only in the sense of the US donating to these countries out of goodwill, but also in the sense that these Western countries who's already been jabbed a lot, needing less of the vaccinations, I think will boost up the global inoculation rate as well.
Right. Up next, we turn our attention to Taiwan, where officials are working to tame a resurgence that has recently led to the suspension of operations at electronic companies. I have Ross Darrell Feingold live on the line. Welcome back, Ross.
Good afternoon.
Now, Ross, I understand daily cases have been hitting above 500 in recent days in Taiwan. Please do start with the COVID-19 situation there.
Yeah, the case count or the new case count every day ever since the outbreak began in May has hovered around that level, some days a little less. But it seems to be a consistent trend, as well as the number of deaths as well seems to be a consistent trend. For now, the authorities are certainly discouraging people from gathering. Schools are closed, restaurants are takeout only, there's no dine-in. And a lot of companies have now shifted to a partial work from home or a rotating work from home with their staff. I mean, one thing it seems from a political perspective, the authorities are still very reluctant to move to a full lockdown in cities or counties across the island. So the information flow is generally pretty good from the authorities. And frankly, the biggest source of frustration from the public is Taiwan's relative slow effort to acquire vaccines and begin inoculating large numbers of people.
And speaking about vaccines, Ross, what has been the public response to pledges of support for vaccines from the US and even from Japan?
Well, certainly the government as well as the public are very appreciative that these two countries, which have very close economic and security relations with Taiwan, have been willing to donate vaccines. But we have to weigh that against the reality that versus the population, these are still a relatively small number of doses until they arrive or the rollout begins. It's still going to be a period of time as well. And ultimately, because these numbers are relatively small, the donated doses from Japan and the United States, it still brings us back to the issue I mentioned earlier, which is Taiwan's difficulty in purchasing vaccines from the manufacturer or manufacturing locally.
Ross, staying with vaccines, I believe Taiwan has also reported a case of rare blood clotting post-inoculation. How are authorities addressing this reality?
Again, as I mentioned earlier, with regard to just the daily information flow, I think it's fair to say the authorities have been fairly transparent with information within the confines of what's permitted to be disclosed with patient confidentiality and data privacy laws and regulations. I don't think that the public is necessarily suffering from vaccine hesitancy here yet, or certainly not in any greater numbers than what we see in other countries. So this incident alone is unlikely to scare the public from getting vaccines. Again, I think the key issue for the public still remains why Taiwan has lagged behind inoculating the percentage of the population that we see other countries have already achieved.
Ross, is the recent resurgence within medical capacity in Taiwan?
For now, it seems yes. Taiwan does have a national health insurance system. Medical care is quite accessible. There's hospitals or smaller doctors' offices quite close to residential areas throughout Taiwan, certainly in the municipal or the urban areas. So the authorities, whether at the central government level or the local government levels, have certainly rushed to make available a sufficient number of beds. And again, I would say that's one of the things that the authorities have been transparent about, letting the public know the number of beds that are available, trying to arrange for example, retired medical personnel to make themselves available should the need arise as well. And then something that's quite interesting about Taiwan in this regard is a relatively large number of elected officials, both in the central government or the legislature or at the local level, actually are medical doctors by training, including in the capital city of Taipei, the mayor is a medical doctor, and there are several other elected officials around Taiwan who are also medical doctors. So I think that lends some credibility to government officials when they discuss these issues, and hopefully the public will have confidence in what politicians are saying, to the extent that, again, some of these officials do have a medical background.
Right. Ross, one final question before you go. What is the latest with regard to Taiwan's plans for travel bubbles ahead of the summer holiday?
Taiwan briefly had a travel bubble with the island of Palau in the Pacific. The take-up wasn't very high because of the high cost, and there were still quarantine requirements when travelers returned to Taiwan. There are other examples where countries such as Singapore had briefly offered a reduced quarantine for inbound travelers from Taiwan, although that program has been put on hold given the increase in cases here in Taiwan. Frankly, this is something that remains to be seen because of Taiwan's low vaccination rates, and then negotiating bilateral recognition or waiver of quarantine for inbound travelers from other countries. This is something that Taiwan's going to need to work on, but it's just too early. They're not there yet. But again, as from a business perspective or an economic perspective, if Taiwan doesn't get to that stage and other countries have begun to arrange that kind of bilateral bubble based on high vaccination rates, Taiwan does have a risk of being left behind.
Right. All right, Ross, as always, thank you very much for your thoughts and your time.
Thank you.
Right, back here in the studio, Dr. Kwak, staying with travel bubbles, when do you suppose will it be possible for Korea to launch such bubbles with its global partners?
We would certainly hope that it'll be sometime in the near future, but theoretically speaking, I don't think it's quite feasible to really predict on how soon we'll get it, because as Mr. Feingold already mentioned, there have been already a few countries that's tried implementing a travel bubble between various different countries, and many of them were actually put on hold eventually because of rise in their daily case tolls and also in regards to fear of their own protection. Travel bubble by definition, it means that these two different countries agreeing to have travel bubble needs to both stay at very, very low daily cases and a strict control of the virus. Having inoculated enough people of the population, also having proof that they both are not spreading in the virus in their own countries. So it's not just the matter of our own domestic control over the virus, but it also means that the country, the countering country, also has to have as good of a control over mitigation of the virus as much as we do. Now, having said that, we are alone already struggling rather to fight, minimize the daily case controls because we are currently having daily cases of 700 or more. I'm hoping that it will gradually go down to, let's say, the numbers that we used to see before, but it also means that the counterpart country also has to be able to control to that good of a level. So I'm hoping that the travel bubble will be implemented very much freely within this year, but realistically speaking, I would have to hold my thought and just have my fingers crossed that it'll happen within the year.
Right. Meanwhile, Dr. Kim, there have been 9 cases of breakthrough infections here in the country as of last week, all among those who received the Pfizer vaccine. How do you explain this reality and how does it compare to findings elsewhere?
Well, I think first of all, we have to consider the results of the clinical trials. So in any cases, the vaccines actually, well, the current vaccines, their efficacy is really good. For example, like mRNA-based vaccines, the efficacy is more than 90%. And then Janssen and AstraZeneca, at least 60 or just 70% of just protection, which means just the rest of them, like 5 to 10% or like 30 or 40%, they can be infected by this SARS-CoV-2 viruses, even after just twice the shots after just this vaccine. So it's kind of just that we actually expected out of just phase 3, just clinical trials. But then, having said that, one thing that we have to consider is the number of just the people who got just shot by these vaccines. For the Pfizer's, actually, the number of people who got shot by these Pfizer vaccines is actually 3 times more than those shot by just AstraZeneca. So those the Pfizer vaccinees actually have some likely to have more just a breakthrough infection compared to AstraZeneca vaccinees. And then other thing is that well, the groups of people who got the vaccines are actually different. The Pfizer vaccines, now just people more than age 75, and then the rest of them is mostly some AstraZeneca. So the immune status and the response to the vaccination is quite different. So we cannot tell the difference just side by side. For those the vaccination and then breakthrough infections, if we do not just compare just side by side in this case. And then another, the reason that we got just some sort of a lower infection in Korea compared to some foreign countries is that I think generally speaking, our just quarantine is in Korea is still just much better than those of other countries. So that's the thing that I can tell for this kind of just a breakthrough infection and there's a lower frequency of breakthrough infection in Korea.
Right, which is important, as Dr. Kwok said, to keep our dedication to social distancing measures.
Exactly.
And Dr. Kwok, it has been said that vaccines are vital in preventing disease as well as lowering fatality. Now, what has been the impact of COVID-19 vaccinations on our death toll?
Okay, so as many of the viewers may already know, we have seen the death toll go from 1.8% in January to now it being at around 1.38%. It's a huge, significant decrease in the mortality rate, and we are currently dedicating this visual effect to the inoculation, and much done so in the elderly generations and also for the people who have severe underlying diseases. From the get-go, we have focused our inoculation to those who might be more prone to getting the infections, such as those people above 60 years of ages, and also for people having multiples of underlying diseases. And we have had success so far, I think, in a sense that we're seeing a lot more, less people actually being admitted to hospitals because of severe disease progresses. And number 2, as we've already mentioned, seeing great decrease in the mortality rates. It may have different factors, though, because the waves of these pandemic were hit different from what we had last year. So we cannot solely pick on inoculation rate in the elderly generations to account for the decrease in the mortality rate. But all in all, we have strong proof that and even with just one single shots of the vaccine, we have a great decrease in mortality rate as well as decrease in the severity rate. So I think the decrease in the numbers from 1.8 to 1.38, as well as the decrease in numbers that we're seeing in admitted people, is a proof that we further need to inoculate more and more people as well.
Right, encouraging proof, of course.
Yes.
Dr. Kim, talk about booster shots has been making headlines in recent days.
Well, for the booster shot, it's primarily just the purpose of the booster shot is just increasing our immune response, especially increase, for example, the amount of neutralizing antibody, for example. And then this is very common to some other virus infection, for example, the flu shot. We actually get just an annual flu shot, every year, and then that could just happen to these coronaviruses as well. And then one of the main things that would just affect this booster shot is how long our neutralizing antibody would just last. And then that is actually seems to different depending on the whether it is our immune response after vaccination or immune response after natural infection. That actually the immunity seems to just very different depending on the different kind of infection or just the vaccination as well. So that for that part, the expert seems to not just agreed on when we actually have to just start our booster shot. And another fact that we have to consider is the variant viruses. Well, although just some variant, for example, the variant from South Africa and then Brazil and then India, I think they are somehow very some sort of just escape from our from the potent neutralizing antibody. And then, but even in that case, if we just increase the amount of neutralizing antibody, that would just affect. So then maybe just depending on some development stages of the current the vaccine that develop, for example, Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines, they actually developing the some second generation the vaccines to cope with the some of these variant viruses. So depending on how fast and how soon they will be available, then we will just determine when we just implementing just the booster shot as well.
Right. Yeah. And against that backdrop, Dr. Kwak, some are claiming the mixing and matching of COVID-19 vaccines will facilitate the administering of booster shots. And countries like Canada, France, and Germany have approved the mixing and matching of COVID-19 vaccines, while Korea, I believe, is exploring its efficacy. What are your thoughts?
So we're currently planning to go through the clinical trial to start mixing and matching AstraZeneca shots and possibly mRNA types of shots. I believe in other countries that are recommending the mix and match of the vaccines are currently doing so because of the blood clot issues. They were warning against inoculating with AstraZeneca jabs to people under 60 years of age, and those who've already gotten those as their first shot are now being recommended to receive the mRNA type of vaccines as their second shots. Now, having said that, there was a cluster of small numbered clinical trials that were already done that have tried giving second shots of mRNA types of vaccines to people who has already received viral vector types, and they showed great efficacy. I believe one of the studies actually showed 4 times the increase in antibody levels compared to a single dose of AstraZeneca vaccine. So it's a great result, and it also showed clinical safety as well. So further exploring, I think, will give us enough proof to start implementing, maybe possibly giving mRNA types of vaccines to the people who's already received viral vector. But we have yet to have a clear confirmation that it's safe to do so yet. So we would have to wait and see not just our own clinical trial, but what the other countries show in their numbers of mix and match vaccinations. And when we do feel it's safe to continue to do so, it would be the right time for us to actually start jabbing mRNA type vaccines as our second vaccines choices as well. But at least for the time being, we would have enough viral vector type vaccine as in AstraZeneca shots, so we would not be having too much trouble to come up with the second shots to those people who's already received AstraZeneca as their first shot. So I think for the time being, we do not have to worry about whether the mix and match is safe or not to be implemented.
Right, we have some time then.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Dr. Kwak, as always, thank you very much for your thoughts. And Dr. Kim, thank you very much for your insights today. Right, while public inoculations are proceeding as planned, risk factors remain, and accordingly, authorities are urging for public vigilance. Thank you for watching.